Hello, and a very warm welcome to this ICAEW webinar, a practical look at finance digital transformation, lessons from the sector in association with Xledger. My name's Simon Gray. I'm an ICAEW Chartered Accountant and Head of Business here at ICAEW, and I'm delighted to be your facilitator for today's session. We very much encourage you to actively participate in today's webinar, and you can submit your questions to us at any time by typing a question into the Q&A box. We've allowed time throughout and also at the end, so please keep your questions coming. There is also an option, depending on the number of questions, to upvote questions posed by others. So please let me know by upvoting the questions you would like me to prioritize when we get to the panel discussion. Closed captioning is enabled on this webinar. If you want to turn on this feature, please click on the CC icon on your screen, but please note that these are automatically generated, so errors may occur. And a link to some useful resources will appear in the chat box shortly. So today, our panel discussion, we're going to have a short presentation, and then we're going to go into a panel discussion. And this panel discussion will cover three areas. Number one, planning for a new finance system. Number two, what good finance implementation looks like. And number three, steps to ensure long-term success. So I'll be fielding questions to the panel, who I'll introduce shortly. And if you have questions for the panel, please fire those questions into the Q&A box. If they're relevant to the section we're talking about at that time, I'll pitch them to the panel then. But anything that we don't cover off, we'll pick up towards the end, and we'll try and get through as many questions as possible. But please do upvote so I know which questions you'd like me to prioritize. Okay, so a little bit of audience participation just to kick things off. We're going to do a couple of polls just to understand you, the audience, a little bit better. So I'll ask my colleague Maddie in the background just to launch poll one. If you could, please, Maddie. So this is just to get an understanding as to the size of your business. So what size of business do you work in? Up to 5 million turnover, 5 to 20 million, 20 to 50 million, 20. Oh, we've got 20 to 50 million. So let's just do the third one on the screen. So three options there. Up to 5, 5 to 20, or 20 to 50. Please select one of those options now. Just the top three. Okay, Maddie, let's close that poll down, please. Okay, so we have 19% of our audience up to 5 million turnover, 5 to 20 million, 16%, and then 20 to 50 million, 66%. So generally the audience today, slightly bigger businesses. So that's useful for our presenters to know. And let's look at the second poll if we can now, please. Just wait for that to pop up on screen. Okay, so easy one, 50-50. Does your organization run projects that are accounted for separately to your main business activity? So does your organization run projects that are accounted for separately to your main business activity? Yes or no? So a 50-50 option for you. That should be quite a quick one. So let's close that poll down now, please. Okay, so fairly even split. Yes, 44%, and no, 56%. Okay, thank you for taking part in those polls. And just a reminder, please use the Q&A box throughout, and we'll pick those questions up and field them at our presenters today. And speaking of presenters or speakers, delighted to be joined by Lucy Standish and Peter Eden from Xledger, along with Andrew Roberts from Theatre Cluid, who we'll introduce shortly. They'll be sharing their experiences, and Andrew specifically, in terms of a real life case study. But to kick things off, just before we get into the panel discussion, I'm going to invite Peter and Lucy just to do a quick presentation, and then I'll bring Andrew in for the panel discussion. So Peter and Lucy, over to you, please.
Hi, thank you for joining us today. My name's Peter Eden, and I'm a consultant at Xledger. So I help our customers implement the Xledger software and train them to get the best out of their new finance system. I'm going to be joined, as Simon said, by my colleague Lucy Standish, who is a project manager here at Xledger, and Andrew Roberts, who is the finance operations and people director at Theatre Cluid. Lucy and I recently worked together with Andrew on Theatre Cluid's implementation of Xledger as their new finance system, and we're going to talk to you about that project. I'm going to hand over to Lucy now to tell you a little bit more about Xledger.
Thanks, Peter. Hi, everybody. I'm Lucy. As Peter said, I'm a project manager here at Xledger, and I work really closely with our customers to guide them through the implementation of the system. So, to give you some insight into Xledger and who we are, it's a cloud-based finance software that enables finance teams to digitize, streamline, and bring efficiencies to both their finance function and their wider organization. We were founded almost 25 years ago in Norway, and today we operate in over 60 countries worldwide to count, with offices being in Norway, Sweden.
I think we lost sound there, Lucy. Do you just want to check your audio? Peter, Lucy, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Yes, Peter. I
I
think we
just
lost
got
Lucy.
disconnected. Sorry.
Aha! Well, it proves
It was,
it proves it's live. So
yeah.
please proceed.
Hopefully that doesn't happen again. So, to give you a bit more of insight into Xledger, who are we and who are our people? One of the things that sets us apart is that all of our consultants, so Peter being one, are accountancy trained, and many of them have worked in finance teams, such as yourselves, in a range of businesses and sectors. So they're really well geared up to understand the challenges that finance teams are facing, and they can offer that insider advice and guidance during the implementations. Um, Today, we're going to talk about, as Simon said, digital transformation projects and how you can plan for those, as well as introduce you to Xledger's project accounting module, and how this can be used to help a range of organizations. So I will hand back over to Peter to show you more about that module first.
Thank you, Lucy. Interesting to see that on the poll it is roughly 50-50 split that whether you use projects or not. I would say a project can be anything you want to report by, such as an event, a show, in the case of theatres, a parish, a geographical area, or a project in the traditional sense. They can also be set up in Xledger in hierarchies and groups as well to aid reporting. I've done a small video just to let you show to show you how. So if we go into the project module in Xledger, I've got some projects set up here. You can see project 00 is what we call a main project, and so it is linked to projects 1 to 9 as the main project. Project 10 is linked to projects 11 to 19. So that means we can report on project 0 or project 10 and get information from the projects below. We can also set up project groups such as A, B, and C here, which do not have to have the same relationship that the main projects do. If I show you in our cross-tab general ledger, which is where we do our reporting, using a profit and loss from January to October, this is for all projects at the moment. Any number you see on the screen there, we can click into and see how it's made up. And as you can see, there's quite a few different projects on there. What we can do is we can break that down and put it, if we choose project 0, we're going to get the results for projects 1 to 9, it being the main project. So the report is exactly the same layout, but this time all we're reporting on is our projects 1 to 9. On these reports, we don't have to click into the number. We can just hover over and we'll get the info behind it. I've just added projects to the report. So now underneath our codes, we can now see how that code is made up by project. Instead of showing our months across the top, we can choose project on our template. And for the same time frame, we can show our profit and loss for each project individually. So project 1 is only made up with project 1 results. Project 2's only got project 2 in it. This makes it a lot easier to report. And remember, we're doing this in the hierarchy. To ensure that your postings are accurate, we can make projects mandatory on, say, your P&L postings, or on your balance sheet postings, or on individual codes as well. You can also close off projects that you've finished so that they're no longer postable to, but they've still got the information behind them in your reports. So who would use projects? Anyone that wants to report on anything rather than just on a cost center or department. So remember, projects can be anything that you want to report on. I'm just going to hand back to Simon.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much, Lucy. Okay, so we are going to get into our panel discussion, but we've met 2 of you, but not our 3rd panelist. So I'm going to ask Andrew to pop up on screen now, please, Andrew, from Theatre Cluid, and just do a quick 1-minute introduction, if you would, Andrew.
Great, thanks, Simon. Good afternoon, everyone. As Simon said, my name is Andrew, and I am the Finance, Operations and People Director at Theatre Cluid. Theatre Cluid is the largest producing theatre in Wales, and what we mean by producing theatre is, unlike lots of theatres around the land that take shows maybe for 1 or 2 weeks at a time, we are in a very privileged position that we create the work. We work on new pieces of writing or theatre, and we have specialist teams on site that make scenery, costumes, props, all on site to go towards our productions. We currently employ over 120 people, and we became a charity in 2021. That's after nearly 50 years of being local authority owned and in effect a department of local authority. We currently run 2 sites, an 800-seat concert hall over in Wrexham and our primary site in Mold, Flintshire, which is currently undergoing a £50 million capital redevelopment. Our finance needs are quite complex. We're culturally exempt, so we have partial VAT recovery, we have theatre tax relief, and we also run a group of companies, including trading arms. We began our journey with Xledger in December of last year, mainly as a result of our current finance system no longer being fit for purpose, as it wasn't going to be developed any further.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrew. Great introduction, and welcome to the panel. Just make sure all of our panelists are on screen, which you are. Fantastic. So we're going to delve into the first topic, the first theme for today's discussion, which is around planning for a new finance system. When people are thinking about putting in a finance system, what do they need to think about in advance of that? How can they best prepare? And perhaps, Peter, I'll come to you first and ask quite a general question. What can finance teams do to put themselves in the best possible position ahead of implementing a new system? What's your advice on that, please?
Okay, so the first thing I think you need to do is to review your existing processes. So what works for you and what doesn't. There's obviously a reason you want to change, and usually it's because there's some functionality or some reporting that you can't do within your own system. Once you've done that, if you create a clear RFI, so request for information, and when I was an accountant, the way I did it was to put down a column for everything that I could possibly think of that we wanted to do, could do, and then 3 columns. One for this is a must, one for this would be nice, and one for I'm pushing my luck here, but you know, it'd be great if you did it. And then if you send that off to whoever you're looking at, look at their answers, but also look at their responses when they come and see you. The next thing you need to do is to look at data cleansing. You don't want to bring everything over from your old system. So have a look at what you will be bringing over. This will help you in the long run. And the last thing I would say is prepare to go into the workshops and the training with an open mind. You will learn things new about the software as you go through the training. You'll have new ideas, and you no doubt will have new processes afterwards.
Got you. Thank you, Peter. I think we could all benefit from a pushing our luck column. I shall remember that for future reference. If you don't ask, you don't get, is what I always say. Lucy, so in terms of a new system implementation, of course, it's not just about the system, it's about bringing the people on board. And certainly from my own experience in putting in systems in my own business back in the day, you can get some resistance. People like change, sometimes they don't. Some people say they like change until change comes along. So how do you bring people along? What's the advice to bring people along with this type of transformation?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is it's all about early communication. So as you alluded to, bringing in a new software comes with a lot of exciting change for the organization. And it's not just the finance function, but with any change, there can be a nervousness about that, understandably. So I think taking the time early on to think about who is this going to impact, that will enable you to seek early buy-in from your team and to build confidence, both in not just the upcoming project itself, but also then the actual usage of a new system moving forwards. And that will really help get it off to a positive start. I think you mentioned everyone reacts differently to change. And there have been quite a few studies into change management. And one of those studies, or some of them, have shown that you need about 16% of an organization to be embracing the change. That is typically the tipping point, which isn't actually that high, but it feels quite high at the time. But once you've got that percentage embracing the change, then the rest will likely follow. So it's about thinking who will be those early adopters that you can bring on board early into the project that will help you moving forwards. And I think that brings me on to probably the second one, which is pre-planning the resource demands that are going to be coming on. I'll talk about resource later. But yeah, sitting down with your team, thinking about how you're going to manage the new resource requirements early on, thinking about the peak busy times that you already typically have as a team, and perhaps what BAU activities you can adjust somewhat so that those individuals feel reassured as soon as possible that they will have enough time, they'll be supported in having enough time in any given working week to commit to both the project and also their vital day-to-day activities. I think those will really, really help.
So those 16% are almost your advocates across the business. If you empower them and bring them on board, they tell everybody else and get everyone else on board.
Yeah.
Okay, good. It does sound quite low, but I guess if that extrapolates through the business and they become advocates pretty quickly, you can get to, well, perhaps never 100%, but closer to 100% than 16%. So thank you for that. Andrew, of course, you've done this practically in your business, Theatre Cluid. I think you mentioned in your introduction that part of the catalyst had been an existing system was not going to be supported ongoing. You made the decision. Perhaps you could talk about both elements in terms of how you planned and also how you brought your people along that transformation journey as well, please.
Absolutely. Lucy, you didn't share that 16% stat when we were working on this project. It's really interesting to know. I think fundamentally for me is there is never going to be a right time. We were forced a little bit because our previous system was no longer being supported. Our organisation is going through a significant amount of change. And as the senior leader for finance, it would be irresponsible of me to have taken us into this next era of our organisation with a finance system that didn't support the way the new business is going to operate. So consider the best time of year. We moved mid-quarter. I was never sure that was going to be the right move, but in many ways, actually, it was, because it took the pressure off certain other deadlines to focus on this. Peter, Lucy, you've already touched on this as well. Don't consider this in isolation of other organisational priorities and pressures. One of the fundamental things that we love about Xledger is its integrations with other systems, and that's just allowed us to look at that flow of data. Where is the parent? Who are the slaves? That information, and how we want to push that data across our organisation and across our different sites. And then the second part is a big stop doing exercise. Once you've made that decision, right, we're going to move on to this system, this process, what just needs to go on the back burner while we focus on this, because we can't keep all of those plates spinning all of the time. And what I will say is brilliant with Xledger, and I'm going to plug it all the way through because it is brilliant in terms of the onboarding process, is the series of setup workshops that Peter talked about. They really do promote debate and discussion and positively challenge us to think about what we want to achieve, but always caveating it with don't reinvent the wheel, but also use the opportunity if you can.
Thanks, Andrew. And how long did this transformation take in your organisation?
So we signed on the line in January of this year, and we went live on the 1st of July. So that's quite tight timescales. But given the process of the construction of our Flintshire site finishing next year, the team wouldn't have had the focus to do this next year. It would have just not worked in the way that it needs to happen this year.
Got you. Thank you. If you have any questions for our panelists on planning for a new finance system, now is the time to pop a question in the Q&A box. If you see me looking to my right, I have a screen here with the question panel open. So if you pop a question in there, I will acknowledge that question and field that to our panelists while people have a think about that. I was curious in terms of the timing. Is that typical timing, Lucy, Peter? Similar to what Andrew expressed in terms of start to completion?
Go on, Lucy.
So the most important thing is having a sensible conversation with someone who's interested in implementing Xledger at the early start of those conversations, saying, what are your timelines? What other things have you got going on? What resource? And I'll come back to that big R word in a second. What resource do you actually have? And then we do map out a timeline that's suitable. And it's getting that balance between how can we set ourselves a challenge, be a bit ambitious, and get it up and running to help us as soon as possible, while also being realistic. But typically, a really good starting point is for us, and the way that we do things at Xledger, to give us ample time for each phase so that we complete each phase thoroughly, is about that 7-month duration. So 4-month implementation, and then that 3-month of outside of that work, but still in the project environment. So there's a lot of support still going on.
Thank you. Peter, final question for you on this section. If you're thinking about large, complex organisations, I think Andrew mentioned he had a couple of different sites, but bigger, larger, complex businesses, multi-site, multi-division. How does that planning and implementation process change, or does it change?
It doesn't need to change at all. We work on Xledger on a settings flowing downwards. So you'll have a holding company at the top where you can do a lot of your settings, and they will flow down into your entities. I've recently implemented a company that had 11 entities and holding companies. So quite a strange structure they had. We managed to get that working. The important thing is that all the data flows up. So the settings flow down, the data flows up. So at holding, you can see all of your companies or one of two of your companies as you want. But you're behind it all is the important stuff, which is your workshops, your training.
Thanks, Peter. And we've had a question from Atif on this topic, which talks about larger organizations. And the question is, when working in large organizations, sometimes other business units have a larger say in the setup of a system. How do you go about ensuring smaller business units get the system to work for them? That might be for you, Peter. Is that one for you?
Yeah, I think the important bit as the lead on the project on your side is to effectively have a champion within each department. So you don't want to leave any departments out. Your purchasing is just as important as your sales. So make sure you've got a champion in each of those. They can bring things to you as a central point, and they can also be involved in the workshops and in the
Thanks, Peter. And I think, Lucy, you mentioned earlier, communication. Communication is everything, particularly if you are a bigger business, multi-site, multi-division. So good advice there. Okay, thank you for the question, Atif. Any more questions, please pop them in the Q&A box. I'm keeping a close eye on that to my right. But let's now, on a timely basis, move on to our second theme of discussion today, which is, what does good look like? So what does good look like in terms of an implementation? So Lucy, let me ask you this question. What are typically some of the things that trip people up or trip businesses up during an implementation? What have you seen? What are the most common kind of pitfalls to watch out for, and how do you resolve them, I guess, is the related question.
Yeah, I think there's no getting away from it, which is why it's come up already so often, which is resource. I think the knock-on effects of underestimating the amount of resource that is going to be required is the most common one that I encounter. It's the most common risk that I'm mitigating during projects. And I think straight out the gate, one of the simplest ways to mitigate this as early as possible is just outlining the resource plans together with, on the client side, doing that yourselves internally, but then working closely with your project manager to make sure that your understanding of what's required is accurate, or as accurate as it can be at that point. And then, agree on that estimated amount of time moving forward so that all of that time can be safeguarded as early as possible to support the project. And just keeping on reviewing that throughout, having an open dialogue, working together as a collaborative team to be honest. If resource is getting to a pinch point where it's simply not feasible to carry on that week as planned, there's always other options that you can consider so that you can alleviate some of those arising issues. You can't always pre-plan for extenuating circumstances or changes. Think you can't know the future, so or certainly not exactly. So I think that's a good thing that you can be doing. And then I think the next sort of thing that I see trips people up is not having clearly defined roles and responsibilities. In the absence of that, it can really hinder a project's progress. There's a huge amount of decisions, questions, tasks during any implementation, and knowing visibly across the team who is enabled to make decisions, who's enabled to be the final decision maker. Sometimes there's no getting away from there being conflicting ideas. We've talked about different teams, different requirements. It's really important to give everyone a voice and include everyone in on those. That's part of the change management. But ultimately, sometimes someone has to be the person who says, I'm making the decision, we're going down one route. And then that really helps support that smooth onwards delivery of the project. It also, enables really efficient delegation across the team. You're playing to that person's strengths, so you can delegate that out and keep those parallel work streams going along the timeline as planned, rather than waiting for person A, for person B, and you're not utilizing the project team as effectively as you can. So clear roles and responsibilities from the outset will be really helpful.
It's good advice, and someone to make the decision.
And someone to make the decision.
Always the hard bit.
Yeah, you're not always the best friend, but you're the person that people are grateful for at the end.
Yeah, it's the important bit, isn't it? Okay, thank you for that, Lucy. Andrew, just in terms of your practical experience of implementation, did you trip up at any point? As Lucy said, things don't always go perfectly. You have to adapt. Did you trip up? What did you learn from that? How did you resolve that? What was your experience?
Yes, of course, because we're only human. It's being strong and holding, and just driving it forward as much as you possibly can, and at least talk about making those decisions and sticking with them. Having said that, we did change our minds at a couple of points throughout the process when we kind of learnt more about the journey and the system, and thought on reflection now we want to make that change at that point to move it forward. But we've always fundamentally worked with the project accounting. It's fundamental to every strand of our business. So that was really the driving force of why we operate in the way that we do.
So you mentioned project accounting, and Peter talked about the project accounting module earlier on. So did you put this in as part of your implementation, and having implemented it and presumably using it now to great effect, how is it working out for you?
In 2 words, game changing. Having said that the previous system and any system we needs to have project accounting, because I say the way that we operate, we run several hundred projects each year. That can be simply a one-night comedian where it's important we record how much the box office has taken for that particular night and the cost associated to it, right the way through to managing a £50 million redevelopment of our site. So the system allows you to be very, very granular if you need to be, or look at things at a high level. And in Peter's demo earlier on, he showed how the hierarchies work really well. Xledger is quite granular, and it takes time to get your head around how you set it up, but that then gives you the information in the right way that you need moving forward. I think also, and they talked about this before, we need to consider the level of data that you want to migrate as part of this. We chose to bring in at transaction level 3 years worth of information because our financial controller thought that was something we want to do, and I supported that. I didn't have to do the bit of work that went with it, but it's again, I think, being sensible about what you're going to use a system for and how you're going to structure it, and we have definitely tweaked since going live in July how we use that project accounting module, and that's mainly for the external stakeholders. And Lucy talks about resource, but a part of this journey for us, one of the biggest things we wanted to achieve, one of our objectives, was to give greater transparency to the non-finance users, and Xledger allows us that in its cloud-based format and its dashboards, and the way that it presents the information in a much more user-friendly way. Now, we haven't quite got to that point on the journey yet, but it's the mechanisms for that are all there. So I think, Lucy, you're absolutely right talking about that resource thing, but not to forget those stakeholders that aren't necessarily your core finance team or your SLT. They're the people who need to engage with that system, and that could be simply from putting expenses in, because that's really important to somebody, right the way through to a project manager.
A final question for you in this section, Andrew. In terms of the people, we talked about the people aspect of this in the first discussion point. How have your staff, how have your employees within the organisation embraced the system? What kind of feedback have you had? Any insight on that would be useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Quite mixed, as I think you'd expect. The finance team we have here is quite long serving. They struggle at times, I think is fair to say, in terms of that change aspect and embracing what efficiencies you can get within a system. But in the main, that has gone down well. From the wider company and team, absolutely, they've loved it because of how dynamic and how easier it is to use. But something that Xledger did brilliantly from the start of the journey is they facilitated a session where they gave a demo and an overview to the non-finance users. So it wasn't just me or our finance team trying to sell this to the wider company. They had that direct interaction, which I think went a long way.
Thank you, Peter. Question for you on this topic. So Andrew talked about flexibility after implementation, tweaking things, I think was the expression he used. How flexible is the system once it's been implemented to kind of tweak things, make changes to adapt the system to the business as you get to work with the system moving forward?
It's very flexible. If we look at we've talked about projects, so let's look at the projects. If you decide that your project hierarchy is not correct, For instance, if you've, I don't know, had some projects as events and you've had some projects as shows, and they're under different hierarchies, and you decide, well, actually, they should all be under the same hierarchy, you can change it. You can change it yourself. It doesn't affect any of the data that's gone in, but if you report on the new hierarchy, it will show the all the projects that are in that hierarchy. You can change the name of a project, you can change the code of a project, and it makes no difference. But you will find that you do change your mind halfway through going, and you think, I need that extra in. You can add extra projects below a project. And so if you want to see how that's made up, maybe production, front of house, and sales, there may be 3 sections. They will all feed into that project. You can do the same on your cost centers, any of the other dimensions that you use. You can add a chart of accounts code at any time, put it into an account group, and it will appear in your reports without you doing any extra work for it.
Thank you, thank you. And this is a question I think Peter, or maybe for you, Lucy, in terms of that implementation process. How involved are you how involved is Xledger on the ground with the business, and over what period? Is it continuous? Is it in and out? How does that tend to work?
I can answer that as an implementation consultant. So as your consultant, I will be involved with you from the kickoff, which is when sales basically hand over to consultancy and project management. I will train you as a consultant, but first of all, we do workshops with you. The workshop is where we understand what you need and maybe guide you as to what you can do. So do you need 1,000 lines on your chart of accounts? No, you don't. You can probably break that down by using the other dimensions, so make it more meaningful. We then take you through all the training and then testing, and then that you have your go live date when you start using the Xledger in earnest. And then we have 2 months of hypercare. We call it hypercare. It's basically enhanced support. I'm still there at that point. So I'm still there, support are there as well. And we aim to get your answers as quickly as possible, so that we don't turn you off at that point when you go live and leave you to it. We're still there in the background. That's typically 2 months. After that, we've got support in the background. So you just log a support call or support ticket, and they will get back to you as soon as possible.
Great, thank you. We've had a great question coming from John. This is a general question to the panel, so I can see you all on screen. So if you want to answer the question, please just raise your hand. John says, has the panel any tips around the pressures of going live for a system on a specific date when perhaps not being fully ready? So you've set a specific date, you're not quite ready. What do you do? Andrew, you were the first.
I'll go for this one. Because it's very, very real. You've got to work to that deadline and hope you can absolutely get to it. I'm going to talk in a little while about the plan, the process that we went through and how you measure success. But with Xledger, we have a go live meeting a couple of weeks beforehand, where there's a brilliant checklist, and it really just prompts you to go, are we happy? And it is a we. It's not just us saying, yeah, all of it will be fine. It's working collectively to say, yes, we're ready to go for that goal, and we're going to go for it. And if we're not, I think it's okay to say we're not, and it's okay to move that date rather than, build yourself up for a fall. Now, that's caveating without knowing what other business pressures are going on at the same time. That might mean that that date is mission critical. And I suppose if that date is mission critical, then what services do you absolutely have to have up and running on that day one? You're not necessarily going to need to pay suppliers on the first day or send out a significant amount of sales invoices, or does it matter if you don't do a bank rec on that particular first couple of days? It probably doesn't in the scheme of things. So it's then for me breaking it down to go, what is the bare minimum I need to be able to achieve that date, and how do I build them back up from there?
Good advice. It's about prioritization. What do you need on day
Absolutely.
one? What can wait till day two or a few weeks in? Good
Totally.
advice. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much for that great question, John. We're going to move now into the time flies. We're going to move now into the third discussion point, which is around future. It's around future success. So thinking about how to ensure long-term success, having done an implementation. Let's perhaps start with you, Andrew. In terms of the steps you took during the process to set you and your team up for long-term success, what were those steps? How would you break those steps down?
I think there were many, of course, but fundamentally it was looking at that end goal and working backwards about what we want to achieve. And going live is not the end of the process. And one of my learnings from this was not allowing, certainly in my headspace and probably the wider team, enough time and focus from go live in the hypercare phase that Peter's just talked about to continue developing and working on it, because it all of a sudden you're moving from the demo system to something that is very, very real. What we as a team quite quickly realized is that it's going to take a full year before we can actually go, yes, it's been successful, because of year end, because of going through the whole seasons of VAT quarters, or in particularly in our industry, one of our biggest shows each year is the Christmas pantomime. Well, we're not seeing how that's interacting with the finance system when we go live in July. We need to see how that all comes through as a project in the January of the following year. So it's just looking at those milestones and trying to measure where you're at and going, it's easy to say, oh, I really don't think I've achieved anything in any part of any project, but just reflecting on it and being more that critical friend as part of that process. Training, absolutely so important. Xledger have got a fantastic online system called Equip that allows the users to learn at their own pace and allows us to go back and refresh on something. So our team was certainly doing it early this week when we needed to add a new fixed asset, and we didn't redo them as part of the training, because we just migrated all existing ones. So you're not necessarily doing the same things day in, day out. So it's going back and just looking on those, and again, not beating yourself over the head because you haven't remembered something. There's an awful lot of information to take on board. Testing was significant, and getting the wider team buy-in and breaking that testing down so that everyone felt they had a part to play, and it wasn't just a certain few of us that were, yes, some of us were leading on it, absolutely, but those team members have to continue doing that when I take a back step away from running the project and they have to carry on the day to day. So they're kind of my ways of looking back on it about how we deem success, I suppose.
Good. Thank you. I'm going to pick up on a couple of points you mentioned there. Lucy, Andrew talked about training. I think learning a new system is it's always difficult. There's a lot to remember. There's a lot to get used to. You can watch, videos. You can have one-to-one training, but actually you need to get in there and do it. Do you have any advice on the best way to learn a new system from clients you've worked with over the years? What works best in getting somebody on board with a new system as quickly as possible?
I think it's hard to suggest that there is one best way, because purely by the fact of being humans, we all learn differently, we all absorb information differently, and different things work well for us. Some of us are audio learners, some of us are visual learners. So it is really important that whatever training program that you have can be somewhat flexible. So as Andrew mentioned, we've got Equip. That's an online platform that really facilitates self-study, gets you seeing visual recordings, interacting. It's got try it yourself tasks that are meant to be in bite-sized levels that help you get familiar and build a bit of confidence. They're short, really lengthy full day training sessions. Does anyone really absorb what happened at 1 o'clock? Not really. So it's about also doing bite size. So yeah, I think, coming back to your question, taking the time, recognizing how you learn best, and then working with your supplier to try and factor that into your training program. So we've got online Equip, but what we also do is support that with focus workshops. So for anyone that needs that exploratory conversation to build the knowledge where perhaps equip wasn't the best thing for them. They've got both avenues. It's a multi-pronged approach. So I think any training program that can provide that would be a really good one.
Got you. Thank you. Thank you. And Peter, Andrew mentioned testing. I was going to ask you about this. The testing. Of course, you need to test. And as you're testing, I guess I've got a number of questions on testing. How do you best do that? What do you do if you find something that needs attention, and how long does this typically take? And are you doing a parallel run with old system, new system for a period of time? There's probably 4 questions in there.
Probably 4, yeah.
Just
let's take the last one to start with. Majority of our customers don't do a parallel run, as in running both systems with the same data at the same time, primarily because they're trying to do new things in Xledger that they're not able to do in the old system. They may have changed their chart of accounts. They may be using a different setup of cost centers now that they've got the hierarchies. So it's usually quite impossible to do, a side by side. What we do is, once we've trained you, we've got your configuration in there. Usually we've got a month worth of testing, and a month does seem quite a long time. However, you've obviously got your day jobs to do at the same time. We've built quite a good a testing suite, if you like, of areas to test. You'll have your own areas that you put in as well. But if you follow them through, it's not only to prove to yourself that you know how to use it, it's also to make the final tweaks. Make sure that what we have configured with you is actually doing what you want it to do. Do the workflows on the purchase orders work as you want them to? Yeah, and by testing it, you'll get the answer to that. We can make the final tweaks before you go live. It's still not too late at go live. We can still make tweaks. Yeah, but you want to go into the go live with the best possible system that you can. And as I say, I am there with you during the testing for Xledger. So any questions, be it you send me a Teams message or you log it on the system, even better, I can then answer them. You can get on with your testing, and it flows a lot easier that way. There's no waiting around. We can't test that bit because we couldn't do that. Yeah, it's structured in a way that you can, and we do point you back to the equip within that testing log to say, this is where you can see that in practice.
Thank you. Thank you. We've had a question come in from Mikkel, I think it is. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. This question is for you, Andrew. It's actually 2 questions. Did you have to consider people classified as, did you have or consider people classified as super user, i.e. a member of your team, that were trained more deeply to support the wider team in implementation and post-implementation? So did you allocate super user licenses to certain people? And then the secondary question is, do you have any regrets or anything that you felt did not work out as you perhaps hoped or expected?
Good question. I think I'm going to break the first question into 2 parts, really. Yes, we have super users. I touched on the granularity of Xledger earlier on, specifically as a system, and we're able to break down those users in an awful lot of detail, but they do have a high level super user, a domain administrator, or a chief accountant, as the other terms deem. So yes, some of us do hold those status within the system. For me, I think it's slightly different around the training, because someone could be a super user because they're great about the logistics of the way it works, but it might be better for someone else to deliver the training because that sits more within their mindset. And the reason why I've split it out is because that's part of one of my regrets with this process, is not involving our people team and our learning and development support more in implementing this system across the company and providing that day-to-day support to the finance team, because I think there were too many assumptions made. Oh, the finance team members, they can just get on with a finance system. Well, that doesn't necessarily sit, particularly if you're moving from a system that works in a very, very different way. So for me, it's bringing in external voices if you can to help on that training, and that probably is my one biggest regret, actually. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a great question. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, if there is any questions on each of those three themes that we've covered today, then please let me know. We've got around about 8 minutes left for questions, so there is plenty of time. Anything on planning a new finance system, what a good finance implementation looks like, or steps to ensure long-term success. The question box is open. If you jump in there quickly, there's an opportunity to pitch your question at one of our panelists. While people are having a think about that, I'm going to ask a couple more questions that have sprung to mind based on what you've all said. Lucy, probably this one for you. We talked about the time it takes for an implementation. You know, it can be several months. It's a long period of time that people are going through this. Are there any tips for keeping teams engaged in this process? You know, everyone wants things to happen overnight. That's not the case. It does take time. How do you keep people engaged and motivated?
Very good question. One of the clients I'm working with at the moment told me just on Friday that they use cake. So bribery is often quite useful. But no, I think on a serious point, it's reassurance. So it's picking up on the little signs that might be indicating disengagement is starting to grow in an individual or across the team, and gently but proactively going to that individual or individuals and asking what's going on. So is it that that individual's feeling daunted by the project tasks they're being asked to complete, or is it because actually there's a lack of clarity reaching them on what those tasks truly are, and then because of that they're putting them to the bottom of the list because they're actually unsure, and then you can tackle that disengagement head on with a proper action plan that works best for that individual or the group that that's happening with.
I think you said a couple of times, haven't you, that everyone's different, so you have to know what motivates or what maybe is demotivating or disengaging individuals. Best way to do that is, as you said before, communicate. Andrew, got to ask you, did you use cake?
Yeah, not gonna lie.
anything other than cake, or was it just cake?
The flowers and the alcohol were certainly used at certain milestones, you know, when we reached those go live dates and other points, but that was more of a thank you than a bribe because we'd actually reached those goals collectively. But you know, everyone's different, and I think just touching on something that you said, Lucy, talking about the disengage or how you keep people engaged. Let's put the positive spin on it. For me, there's a big thing around terminology, particularly when you're moving finance systems, and what one system refers to something can be very different, and that was a big obstacle for our team. I talked about long serving, they like to refer back to the previous system, and it's like, well, let's forget those and try and reference where that piece of work now sits within this area, and so a big glossary of terms is definitely needed.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. Did you simply switch off the old system and then now you're on Xledger, there's no going back? Because if you let people go back, invariably they sometimes try to, don't they? So
yeah, no,
yeah, okay,
it's gone.
Yeah, good. All right, we've got about 7 minutes left. If you haven't got a question, I've probably got time for one audience question, and there we have it. Fantastic. So from Mikel again, what is the feedback since implementation from the non-financial people on the system's ease of use, input, and reporting? So from your this is for you, I think, Andrew, from your non-financial people within the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be honest, we're not quite there with it yet. Since going live, they are engaging with the system. It's very user friendly, and that's not me saying it. That's the team saying it from a day-to-day expenses point of view, from the purchase order and that approval flow. It's changed the way we operate as an organization, because we have so many projects and so many people needing to have eyes over the expenditure. It was quite clunky in the old system. The workflows do push the information to the right people, and that's been warmly received. Terminology, as I've just touched on, absolutely is a challenge with those teams, because they got used to something being called a purchase delivery note, for example, in an old system, and now it's called a good receive note. It sounds straightforward to us. It will work within the finance world, but non-finance users, we have to allow a bit more time to take it on board. So the feedback is strong. I have dropped little snippets of information via the dashboards and the reports that I'm currently using to some of the senior team and those project managers to kind of remind them of what's coming. And again, it has been received positively, because they're moving from a world where they were having to ask the team for the information. They weren't able to access it directly, which is what I really need them to do.
Okay, thank you. We've had a question from Tracy. This is the last question I'll be able to take from the audience. I've got a question for you coming up, Lucy, as well, to finish. So Tracy says, how did Theatre Cluid manage the resource needed? Was any specialist resource brought in to cover backfill, particularly with year-end audit crossing over the implementation? Did you bring extra resource in?
No, I'm afraid not.
That's the quick answer.
It is a quick answer. It goes back to that stop doing exercise. And year end specifically, because we can control that deadline. And when I was reporting to the board about those year end outcomes, I was open with them and said, I'm not going to be reporting to you on the usual timetable as in previous years, because we are implementing a system, and explaining the reason for that. Discussed it with the auditors. The audit was pushed back 6 or 7 weeks again, just to allow us that breathing space, because in March and April we were really in the we were really in the design stage of the system. So we needed to give that the focus to allow the Xledger, the implementation journey, and that 1st of July deadline to actually be realised. I can see the need in larger organisations to bring in resource to be able to backfill in certain areas. But with us, mainly because also we've got reduced operations, because, as I've said earlier, the redevelopment that's going on, we had some spare capacity to be able to take this on at that time.
Thanks, Andrew. So, Lucy, I'm going to finish with a question for you. Perhaps in 1.5 minutes or less, we are short on time. So, you've recently completed the project with Theatre Cluid and Andrew and his team. What's been the key takeaway from you from that project?
So Andrew just talked about some of the measures that he proactively took to reach out to auditors, to board members, to communicate the change, and to have an honest conversation about what simply needed to drop to allow the progress of the project to continue at the pace that we had planned it for. When someone is empowered to have those conversations and tackles them head on, the difference it makes cannot be understated. It's something's got to drop. Something needs to change. So you need to tackle that head on. And Andrew did that exceptionally well, I must say. And I think I learned so Andrew took time with his team to schedule offline time. So you've got me, a project manager, I'll be scheduling all the resource that's interacting with the consultant. But there's a lot of offline time that's required of your team on your side. And Andrew worked to create a schedule that I couldn't create, that not always gets put in place. And the difference it made having that time put aside, it almost gave his team permission, I think, to feel, right, I'm actually being given the support really proactively to go away and do these tasks. It's a lot going on, so doing it all together where possible and creating that collaborative project atmosphere goes a really, really long way. And I saw that a lot with Theatre Cluid's approach.
It's a good way to finish. That's 2 C's: communication and collaboration. Great messages. So thank you very much. We are 1 minute to the close. So that just brings me to finish things up formally. I'd like to thank Lucy, Peter, and Andrew for your insight and advice you've shared with me and our listeners today. Thank you to our listeners, those of you who have attended live, and those of you that will attend on demand. For those of you who attended live, thank you for the great questions, and I hope you found the session useful. A short feedback survey will pop up on your screen after the webinar finishes. Please do take a quick moment just to complete this feedback survey. Feedback is really important, and of course will help us to shape future events, so please go in there and complete that. And we had a question in about whether this has been recorded. I alluded to that a moment ago. It will be available on demand. It has been recorded, and we'll send you a link to that on-demand recording tomorrow. But that just leaves me to say a final thank you to everybody. Thank you to Xledger. Thank you to the team who joined the panel. Thank you to Theatre Cluid. Thank you to all of you for being here today. We'll see you again soon. Thank you and goodbye.